Welcome to the 100 Rural Women podcast. I'm your host, Teresa Kittredge, founder of 100 Rural Women. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to creating connections and inspiring leadership. We see a future where more women are in positions of leadership, and we are set out to interview 100 amazing women doing important work in rural America. So I'm excited to introduce you to our guest today, Fallon Ryan. So I want everybody to welcome Fallon to the podcast.
Hi, Teresa. Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and honored to be included in your 100 women interviews, especially because you're just one of the most amazing women I know. So I guess a conversation between two, hopefully amazing rural women, if I can still claim myself in that category as well. So,
Well, you can. And that was the interesting thing when we were setting out with this podcast, because it's women who grew up in rural, who moved to rural, who work in rural, who care about rural. So it's a pretty broad spectrum of people. And we've really having fun interviewing people. And I was thinking back too of when we first met. It was really when we first started 100 Rural Women. And I think we met at Sprout over
yeah.
in Little Falls at the food hub, which was super cool. And so it was so much fun to meet you and to be connected and to see you venture off and out to law school and moving to another state. And um, we used to read a bio and then we realized, oh, that's pretty stale. We're just going to let the bio come out as we
I like it.
as
Yeah.
we do it. So just kicking off with the first question, can you share a lesson learned from a grandmother or maybe another, important, influential older woman in your life?
Yeah, I was thinking about this and trying to just kind of conjure all of these really incredible women that I've been able to learn from in my entire life. And I like the theme of grandmothers and kind of all the forms that we just get mothered and grandmothered, I guess, at different points of life, and whether the ones we choose or the ones that are given to us through birth. But I think that the main theme that I was trying to put the right words to in thinking about lessons that I've learned from these women that came before me was really just this perfect finding your unique blend of like the masculine and feminine. I think that women often were like put in boxes for so many different reasons in so many different ways. But I think what I've been trying to find in my own life recently is trying to really conjure this like perfect mix of like kindness and authority, and thinking about how I've seen other women do this with so much grace, and even thinking about stories that I've heard from my grandmas on my paternal side and my maternal side, and how they did this differently. And then thinking even just like the world that my mom grew up in, and just how differently she had to choose her decisions she made in life and what she ended up doing with her career and marrying and having kids and whatnot. And even having me, and I'm almost 30, but when I was born, she gave me a gender neutral name because she didn't want me to, not to have any opportunity because people assumed I was a woman. And so I just think that's interesting. 30 years later, I don't know if I think we've come a long ways since then. I don't know if I would consider that same thing having kids now, but still something to think about. And especially, I guess, today we're facing really large obstacles again. But I was thinking of this in terms of so my mother's mom, so many stories that I know of her, and something that I really try to maintain in my own life. And one of like my biggest, I guess, aspirations is this concept of a crowded table. I don't know if you're familiar with the Highway Women song "Crowded Table," which I consider to be my theme song for life. And I think my grandmother really embodied this. My mom talks about growing up in a household of 9 children. She was the youngest. They always had people they were taking in to just feed and house, and they lived right on the railroad. And so my mom talked about having people who would be just traveling the rails who would just end up at their house. And so they commonly would have a stranger at the table eating dinner with them. And she was telling me this story about at some point in time, like her mom was just so gifted at so many different crafts, made all of their clothes, and she had this huge garden, and she like made sure that their table was just like filled with food every day. And then it also was just like filled with, random people. But my mom got to know the world through all these people that were just at their table living in very rural Minnesota at the time. They lived in farm country outside of Brainerd and quite a few miles outside of town. And so I think that's just such a beautiful way to embody like this spirit of rural, both living in a place where you don't necessarily have access to neighborhoods in the same way, or, they didn't have neighbors in the same way, but they still learned so much about the world from just the people they were bringing in and feeding. And it still embodies the spirit of rural and thinking about community building and taking care of your neighbors that both live close and far, and the love that comes with that. And then I think of, my other grandmother on my father's side, and I think about how she always told me all of these stories about how, she had four sons and one daughter, and her daughter was the youngest and really wanted to ice skate. And there was a big ice skating rink in town, but it was only used for hockey. And so my grandmother had talked to a lot of people about trying to form some sort of like figure skating club or something with that women could be a part of. And there was a lot of pushback to this. And so instead of, waiting for somebody to do something about it, she really made this lesson so clear is that she was just going to do it. She started a campaign and she started a figure skating club so that my aunt could be on the ice with or have some ice time of her own and learn how to skate and skate in the way that she wanted to and have space for herself to grow and learn in this really beautiful way. And so I think having just these really badass women that came before us, but that did it with so much grace and tact that they, still maintained a really beautiful community and were able to perpetuate a beautiful future in that way as well. And I don't know if there's anything harder in trying to figure out how to have those two mesh at once. And that's, I think, what I'm now trying to figure out and trying to take this lesson and really make it my own and find my own style and doing this appropriately, I suppose.
I love it. Yeah, I was really lucky too with my grandmothers, and my mom's mom was a huge activist, and she was all about building libraries. So yeah, it is. That's interesting what they've left us to think about how to pull that all together. And they grew up in such different times. And I know we talked about rural and talked about Brainerd, but when you talk about your connection to rural, what do you see? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, I think I'm chasing rural. I think every stage of my life, I've basically moved to a more rural place. And so
Hmm.
right now I live in Heartland, Vermont, which is, probably the smallest place I've ever lived. And it is just, I think, the epitome, though, of, what we think about when we're thinking about really building such strong community ties within a rural environment. There's community dances in a barn, and there's like local restaurants that and you have live music on Wednesday night every week, and you have taglines that go along with that. And I think rural is just like really having a sense of place and having this love that like roots you somewhere, and just a sense of like really appreciating the world around you and what comes with that. And so I think coming from a rural place where I lived in Minnesota and growing up in Brainerd, and now living in rural Vermont, where I moved to Vermont originally to go to law school, as you mentioned, and then decided to stay here after graduating. And I think this idea that you're able to, well, specifically with Minnesota and Vermont, I guess, you get to really experience a place year round and be in tune with what that means at any given point in time. And so I think, the seasonality of Vermont and Minnesota is so incredible. It just makes you feel so much more grounded to where you are and appreciate each season for what it has to offer. And so I think, right now in Vermont, we're in like full blown summer. And so we're really getting to experience the bounty of the earth through like the harvest season. And there's just so many farmers markets and community supported agriculture. And like the co-op scene of Vermont is so strong. And so it's so easy to eat so well here and really know where your food is coming from. And it's almost feel like where I live, at least it almost serves as kind of like a map of how we could live. It feels like you're going back in time when you go to Vermont. 'Cause it really is still like old buildings. It's part like the older part of, the United States. And we have there's so much more commitment to craft and trade, which is really beautiful to see this commitment to really carrying on these traditions of understanding how to woodwork and how to repair things and really understanding where our food comes from. And there's such a cost to convenience. And so I think when you really are invested in a place and you're really invested in, your neighbors doing well and thriving collectively and part of the quilt that is rural, I think it it just becomes a much more beautiful place to exist in. And living rural, you don't get the same access to healthcare or to convenience, and it's just not available. So you really have to know how to be self-reliant to some degree, but not self-reliant in just yourself, on your neighbors as well, and kind of come together and be able to collectively have the skills that you need to get by and feel full and live a really beautiful life. That was maybe about kind of a long-winded way to just say this, like, rural to me is this like really beautiful quilt of people really doing their best to play a role and choosing to collaborate, whether that just be through their skill or through their trade or craft, and existing in this together in this like love for this place that really just connects us.
I've only been to Vermont once and it was gorgeous, but I had a meeting at the Capitol and it's just a beautiful building, very different than our Capitol in Minnesota. Um, and I was just so accessible and everything. I was just like, wow,
So
this is
accessible. Yeah, there's
amazing.
no
Yeah.
security or anything. You
No,
you can just
no.
go walk around. Yeah. And there's no billboards in Vermont, which just makes it feels like wherever you're driving, it feels like you're driving rural just because there's trees everywhere and you're not bombarded by ads. And so I really never knew how much this bothered me until I started to go to other states and you're just like, can't you just look at trees while you drive?
Yeah,
So,
what's up with that? What's up with that?
yeah, exactly.
And tell us what took you to law school?
Yeah, yeah. So when we met, Teresa, I was working as the engagement coordinator at Sprout, and I was working on really thinking about building the local economy around the local food system. And I was doing a lot of different programming in order to try to make this happen, and then was doing some different community organizing and some different policy initiatives, and really decided that I wanted to build my toolbox and feel like I wanted to do more to try to help small farmers retain their farms and stay on farmland. And so went to law school thinking that I wanted a better understanding of how we could retain farmland and maintain access to local food and a healthier, more sustainable, robust food system within the US or just regionally, I guess, wherever we are. And so I didn't really know what that looked like at the time, but I thought, policy was at least one way to do that. And like really understanding how policy was written and read and interpreted, I really decided just a law degree made a lot of sense. And there weren't too many programs in the US. Well, I guess there still are not that many programs in the US that specifically focus on food and agriculture law and policy. And Vermont Law School in South Royalton, Vermont is really one of the only schools that does this. And so, yeah, so I decided to pursue a law degree as well as a master's in food and agricultural law and policy in order to better serve my community in the best way I could see how, and thinking about really building up the skills and know how, or at least try to understand better pathways on maintaining farmland within the US.
You did a dual program then?
Yep, yeah,
That's
I did a
cool. That's
program. Yeah,
cool.
and so it
Yeah.
was, yeah, it was a great experience and just such a great way to just meet so many other like-minded people that are doing such incredible work and just become a little bit more well-versed in different ways we can try to maintain farmland. And now you think, I'm graduated and thinking about trying to implement that, and that's a different challenge, I suppose. But it's definitely been exciting and something that I'm very thrilled I chose the path to pursue and look forward to kind of seeing how that continues to form and change. But it ended up leading me in an area that I really never thought I would be in. And I think this is like the beauty of life, that sometimes you get to choose the direction, but what comes along your path is, pretty unknown, and you just really have to embrace it and see what happens. But I ended up, through my law school experience, I became like very fascinated with the bankruptcy code. And the fascinating thing about bankruptcy was like something that was actually written into the Constitution of the United States, and something that was contemplated by our founding fathers, that we didn't want people to be burdened by debt for their entire lives, and thinking about allowing people like a fresh start and new opportunity to participate fully in their community again without being burdened by debt, which is, not historically how debt has been dealt with, and has, a really pretty brutal history of how different civilizations have decided to go after people in debt. But anyways, there is a specific chapter of the bankruptcy code, chapter 12 bankruptcy, which is specific to family farms and fishermen. But for the most part, I'm interested in the farms part of it. It's the most powerful chapter of bankruptcy and can be a really incredible tool in thinking about how to maintain farmland. So you can restructure debt, maintain the family farm and the family business, and then it can also be used as a succession tool in thinking about maintaining a farm within a family while removing the debt, so that it can move on to the next generation without having the same burden placed on the next generation. And so I've been really fascinated by Chapter 12 as a tool to maintain farmland. And I started looking for attorneys that were doing this, and started advocating to all of my friends who were also going to school for food and agriculture. I was like, you should go into this. There's like nobody doing this right now. I was like, the person there's been one attorney doing this in Vermont for the last 30 years. Her name is Rebecca Rice. And she has been just doing incredible work on maintaining farmlands and working with farmers and debtors. But she was retiring, wasn't taking any new cases, and there was nobody stepping up to take over this work. And so I was trying to pitch this to literally everybody I knew at the time. I was like, you need to pursue Chapter 12 bankruptcy. Like, somebody needs to do this. This is going to be a huge gap that we just have nobody working or serving this population any longer. And I was just talking about this so much, and just like it kept like it was almost like it was like a ping pong. It was like kept getting hit back to me. They're like, "Why don't you just do this?" I was like, "That's crazy." I was like, "I'm just graduating from law school." Like I was like, "I don't, that's not what I need to do." So I ended up spending my last semester of law school. I worked for the bankruptcy judge of Vermont, in the District of Vermont, Judge Cooper. I ended up turning in her office. So I just worked in her office for a semester, and one of the best mentors I've ever had. And thinking about this like pairing of like kindness and authority, or this like blend of like masculinity and femininity, and still maintaining this like really kind disposition, but being incredibly strong backed and authoritative, just like knowing what you're talking about and standing your ground. But yeah, and I really fell in love with the bankruptcy code and like how powerful it is. And having a tool in our country that's probably one of the most equitable aspects of our legal framework that's baked into the US legal system, at least. So yeah, so I ended up completely shifting what I thought I was going to be doing with my life to thinking about, instead of, working on funding streams, or I guess alternatives to maintain farmland through, either like conservation easements or agricultural easements, to actually thinking about this like really this concept that basically all of us are pretty familiar with at this point in the time, because the US economy really works on a debt credit system. But helping people the best way I could, and thinking about becoming a debtor's attorney and working with not only farmers but just consumers and businesses on trying to either restructure or shed debt in order to participate more fully in community. So it's been a good ride, and again, very long-winded way to say that.
No, absolutely is. You never know where life's going to take you. And so when you think about when you were young, did you know what you wanted to do? Did you ever think you'd end up in law, or could you ever imagine doing what you're doing today?
Um, I come from a long line of lawyers, and so I could imagine myself in law. I fought it for a long time, and so that was something that I really didn't think I was really trying to not go to law school just to be another attorney within the family. But I officially became the fifth generation of attorneys within the Ryan family. So on my dad's side, I took, I guess, the baton there, but the first female attorney. So that's exciting. And thinking about, yeah, rural women, I guess, and took over the law practice for the family to some degree. I'm doing a different area of law than anybody else in my family has before, for the most part, and like specifically working in bankruptcy. But I think I've always been really enamored with the ability to serve my community and like play a role that is needed, especially if it's not being filled. And so in some way, I think this makes a lot of sense, and just like trying to find kind of these niche areas of the world that there are just gaps that need people operating within. And this is, I think, one that's definitely not, I don't think it's like the sexiest area of law, or like maybe like the sexiest career path. And so I think it's really fun that way, and thinking about just trying to help people in ways that there's this area that is there's such a stigma for people personally filing for bankruptcy, which is so fascinating when we think about it, because there's such a stigma for personal bankruptcy when it's, just a tool. But for business bankruptcy, usually we consider that like a smart business move. And so it's this interesting dichotomy of kind of the bankruptcy world. But yeah, I think I always wanted to be able to do something to help my community, and thinking about just a way to be able to have kind of my a little bit of independence to be able to structure my career and my life the way I wanted to, and not be so boxed into, I guess, some corporate track to some degree. So now I work for, yeah, just a really small law firm. We're based in New Hampshire, but we do bankruptcy in both Vermont and New Hampshire. And it's exactly that. It's allowed me to help a lot of people learning how to navigate the bankruptcy code from the debtor side for the most part, and a lot of freedom to still live the life I want, which is really nice that I still get to like, run around Vermont and New Hampshire playing and hiking and biking and swimming. So
And I loved when you talked about it being, that equitable piece. I do not know a lot about the bankruptcy law, but that's really good for you. I mean, I think you found your passion, which is amazing. And so when you think about, you've gotten to do a lot of interesting things in your life, and you worked in at Sprout, you law school. What are some of the more highlights or most memorable things that you've been able to do career personally?
I'm so lucky that I've gotten to have so much variety in my life so far. So I don't know. Obviously, I think it's important to acknowledge I come from, somewhat a background of privilege in the fact that I like had the opportunity in my 20s to have time to really figure out what I was going to do. I just, took on debt from law school really for the first time. And so the first part of my 20s was a little bit easier to navigate, just being able to try different things and take a lot of different opportunities, which was pretty incredible. So I think I got to the more random jobs, the more random experiences I think you can have in life, I think just makes you like a more robust human with more empathy and more understanding for how the world works and for how people operate. And so I think I was lucky and I almost got to maintain my youth for longer. Not that that's gone, I guess, but I think I got to maintain kind of this like childlike joy for a majority of my 20s, which is great. And again, not gone, but there's just like there's a really special and unique nature to that. I loved my time in my early 20s right after I graduated from college. I, just worked a lot of gig work. I got to be a farmhand and drive tractors and weed gardens. And then I was working for Sprout, the food hub, and just got to do all of these programming jobs where I was building out cooking classes with caregivers and doing like pop-up events with little pop-up food markets or local food like farmers markets essentially in food deserts and wearing a tomato costume at a salsa fest that I was doing with Sustainable Farming Association. And I got to just, travel around the world and meet random people that were farming in different ways. And I think again, like just the more that you get to experience in the world, like the better you are able to really try to work on yourself to become a better human, but also just like understanding the world a little bit more comprehensively. And all of that, allowed me to go to law school a little later in life and in Vermont, which is such a special place. It's like this, like really, it's this rural town that has a private law school. And so you're going to law school by day and then you can go like hike a mountain in the afternoon. And it was this like incredibly special experience where I was living in this rural town of South Royalton, but I could walk everywhere. And so they had a little co-op in town and a few different restaurants and I could walk to school. And so like this incredible experience to be able to, I don't know, just see how different communities can function in different ways and really get to determine like what I wanted for my life and feel like I just have no regrets about anything I've done or the ability to do so much. And there's no limit to constantly being able to choose something new or try something different and do something for a while so you can learn a new skill or about something or new information for a while. And then when you no longer feel like that's serving you or you're not able to serve in the same way, moving on to the next thing. And so I'm excited now that I am an actual attorney and I feel like I get to help so many people this way. And I'm excited to see what this turns into and what I decide to do next. So pretty incredible.
Yeah, and that's good. Variety. What do they say? Variety is the spice of life. But it
Yes,
is very, it's
exactly.
very, very true. And I had like a 20-year career, and then I've done like 5 different things since then. So it is. It's a. I think it's good for your brain too. To just, I think your brain grows with different experiences, and you touched on this a bit because I know that you live in this bounty of nature. I mean, not that you didn't grow up in a beautiful area with lakes, but where you're at now is just like so incredible. So, what do you do for fun? Does nature recharge you, or you have a lot of stress in your job because there's a lot of sadness. I can't imagine some of the things that you have to navigate with people. So, how do you sort of step back and take care of yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, definitely. I think that's like what, like law school or doesn't necessarily prepare you for, but being a human does. And like thinking about these other different roles I've had, trying to, yeah, be really empathetic. Cause I think a lot of my job really feels like therapy sometimes. And people are going through this is when they finally come to me, they're going through some of like the hardest periods of their life and finally
Right.
asking for help. And so, yeah, and that's been something to navigate as well. So trying to navigate the emotional component that comes with that. So thinking about trying to maintain some connection to food and agriculture, which is kind of my background and still my passion, and thinking about trying to still support this in a lot of different ways. I do still work sometimes at the farmers market for a local farm just to stay connected to kind of the community that way. And it's always nice to, instead of trying to help somebody save their home from foreclosure, I can talk to somebody about just like how to cook a squash, which is also nice. And so otherwise, yeah, mostly just trying to, yeah, think nature is like one of my biggest recharge points. And so I spend a lot of time trail running and hiking and biking. Either there's a lot of gravel biking around here. So I've been doing a lot of that. And it's such a good way to explore, so you just like have all of these like rural back road Vermont roads, not even back roads, just like everything's like gravel in Vermont. And so you just kind of like have to have a little bit more of a robust bike, but trying to find a lot of different bodies of water to swim in. I think the biggest difference from living in Vermont now versus Minnesota is I spend a lot of time swimming in rivers instead of lakes. And so that
Ah.
that was a bit of an adjustment to some degree, but it's been really nice. And I found a local swim club. So I swim masters now. And so there's just like, an adult swim team, which is awesome, especially because you have this huge age range and ability range. And so I swim with them a few times a week. And then we have coffee afterwards on Fridays. And so it's just these little ways that you just like really, I just really feel like my like life is so full. You just get to, have the same type of dynamic you got to have when you were young and in sports. And it was so fun that you just like get to like get so tired with your friends and then, go get ice cream afterwards. And so it feels like the same kind of joy that I get to go swim with all my friends. And then we get to go to breakfast together on Fridays. So I think yeah, I think it's a lot of activity and a lot of nature and a lot of just like really incredible people that I think really energize me. And I know we were talking about this beforehand, but and then just like coming back from like a tonsillectomy, so I'm like finally able to like move and eat and talk again. And I didn't know how much I relied on all of these things in my life. Like I knew they were important, but like I couldn't do them for 3 weeks, and I think I was probably just a nightmare to deal with because I was being so dramatic about it, and I had like all this manic energy that usually goes into just activity. And so I'm really excited to finally be back to being able to move again and eat again and talk more normally again. So it's nice to be able to celebrate my body and what it can do, and that I can appreciate all of these things and hopefully not take them for granted as much and just be really grateful that I have these abilities on a day-to-day basis.
What would you like to share about what you're reading, listening to, watching? We get the best. And of course, me, it's selfish because I'm like, oh, I want to read that. I want to hear that. I want to see that. But what would you like to share about that? I know you're super busy, so
Yeah, that's brilliant. I love that. I think that's like such a great way to collect a book list or a show list or something. I'm really thrilled because I just started getting back into reading for fun. And so I graduated law school in May of 25. And so I'm a year out. And so finally like back into reading for fun, which is so exciting. And so I'm really recently I love the author. I think it's a Swedish author. His name is Frederick Bachman. I don't know if you've heard of him at all.
uh-uh.
So I just got done with a series. It's called Beartown. It's a 3-book series, but he is just an amazing writer. They talk about really capturing community and people so well. He just writes people so well, and like the way that you read a book and you really understand how these people function and how everything intersects and how everything like really impacts everything else. And even if you don't really like a character or like really like how they interact in the world, you really understand them and still have like empathy for the situation. And I just think there's nothing more beautiful that can be accomplished than somebody who has that ability to like write people and characters that well that you can still like them or adore them or love them in different ways, but at least appreciate them. So yes, I've been really into his books right now. And right now I'm reading this really cute book. It's called Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. And I don't know if you've heard of that one either, but it's
Mhm.
kind of it's a quick read. It's really cute. It's a yeah, again, kind of this story of this woman who had a very unconventional upbringing and a very tragic upbringing. And it's her navigating the world as an adult. And it's like just her insights into how everything functions. And it's so funny because it really demonstrates how I think normal is so relative and we only understand how we understand the world. And so trying to figure out the social norms. And if you don't necessarily, you haven't been really raised with those, how do you figure them out? And, like what is normal. So it's definitely a very entertaining
Ah,
read.
good.
But otherwise, I've been watching reruns recently, kind of like the comfort shows. I've been watching The Office and Parks and Rec for the most part.
Absolutely, two of my favorites. So I know you're really good at this, but I staying positive, and I just think that you have a positive force about you. How do you stay? I mean, there's so much chaos going on in the world. You've got a super stressful job. How do you stay positive?
I think this is so important for all of us to like really be so intentional about this, right? And something I've actually been working on almost the other side of this, Teresa, is I am really trying to work on less toxic positivity. And so I
Ah,
am finally getting to a point in life where I think I have realized that things cannot be positive all the time, which has almost been alleviating to some degree, but it's been good. I feel like I've like fully embraced just that we need to experience all emotions. And I think right now it's impossible not to do that. And so I think it was becoming, it's exhausting to try to figure out how do you put a silver lining on everything or make it have a positive spin, which I think I did for so much of my youth. And I'm really, it's quite freeing to not have to do that anymore, I guess. But for the most part, I think I still just have just so much love for like, the community around me and like the people around me. And I think things like this even are just so heartwarming. It's so nice to see and hear your voice again. And, like we met 5 years ago and really haven't interacted much since then. But it's this constant reminder that we have so many different connections that we make throughout our lifetime and that people are just so beautiful and this world is so beautiful. And like I said, I'm finally coming back into like this ability for my body to do so much again, which is so exciting. And so I've been really trying to embrace really enjoying wherever I am and trying to make the most of that. It's almost like I've been trying to think about making my future self proud of how I use the most of my time right now. And so thinking about, tonsillectomy is like not the most intense thing. It's only like 3 weeks that you're like kind of out, or 2 to 3 weeks, depending on your recovery period. But I used it as like kind of this measurement of thinking about I couldn't do much. And so I really was trying to lean into the fact of resting and really appreciating rest and this time in my life where I just got to like relax and read books and watch some shows and not feel guilty about it, that I just could sit and not do anything. And I think that's what I'm trying to appreciate more and more, is just really appreciating wherever I am at that given point in time and the ability of what I have to do and what's going on. And so whether that means the weeks that I'm just so incredibly busy that have really intense client meetings or really intense court things happening, and also still trying to figure out how to be active, have social life, and figure out other things I want to do with my time, that I just feel exhausted from having so much going on. But kind of the alternative, what I was saying before, of just being like really grateful that I have the ability to do so much and the energy to get me through it. And then by the time you collapse at the end of the day, you just fall right asleep. So yeah, so I think I'm staying positive, and just the constant ability to navigate the, I don't know, variety of life and like the uniqueness of the situations you're presented with, and the ability to do so much with your time, or really appreciate doing a little less with your time. And either way, kind of coming to terms with that and really being grateful that I continuously just have so many beautiful humans in my life that I get to keep interacting with and learn more about. And I think that's so sweet that this is something you're so good at and so good at elevating, is, the voices and stories of others. And so hopefully that's something that we just continue to do with each other forever. And that's the only way that we get through.
absolutely. And so when you think about, I mean, you're living very rural now.
Yeah.
When you think about other, when you think about women in general and rural women, of course, is our focus. But how do you think we can better support each other?
Boy, yeah, I think that is the question. I'd received this question beforehand from you, and I was thinking about this, and the first thing that came to mind was just like, just support them. I think it's something that, whether it just be a phone call to one of our friends just to check in, see how they're doing, whether it be kind of like I guess, a text to one of our, mom friends, just offering to watch her kids for an afternoon, or making somebody an extra batch of something like lasagna and putting it in our freezer to give to a new mom, or somebody who's just like went through a procedure or just doesn't have time to cook for themselves when they need it most, just nourishing them, or just, really trying to make time to really be there fully for people every once in a while, and really just kind of either, whether again, just getting coffee together or just sitting in a room when somebody's going through the tragedy, or supporting them through really just kind of, I don't know, really applauding each other and supporting each other, just making sure we give more compliments to some degree, of like when people are doing a really good job and when they're really killing it and being badasses. And I think just like the kind words and affirmations just go such a long way. And we so often, I think, forget to really tell people we love and admire why we love and admire them, or that we even do love and admire them. And so I think just more words of encouragement and admiration and affirmation, while also just, recognizing that I think, yeah, women are just incredible. We're doing so much, we just have so many things on our plate all the time, but we're like constantly just making it look so easy. I'm just constantly so impressed by all of my like female friends that are just able to consistently balance so much but make it look so effortless. Not that it isn't effort, a lot of effort, and I think it doesn't always need to look effortless. I think maybe that's sometimes part of it too, is just allowing each other to demonstrate the reality of how hard it is to do everything all the time, and maybe a little bit more commiserating and trying to find the difference between venting or complaining and gossip, because I think that's something that can be so dangerous to slip into like the gossip realm. But yeah, and then from a more practical, like policy standpoint, I really hope that we can try to figure out more like, actual rural healthcare, especially thinking about maternal health and thinking about this like balance between work and children and what that actually means for people trying to do so many different things within their lifetime. I think obviously like when you live rural, there's a lot less options for childcare and there's less concentration of children. And so it's a lot more trying to figure out kind of your own mechanisms to do that. Which again, like that's community is great for that, but that's still quite difficult and usually falls on women and women who don't have children who are asked to do extra because they don't have kids yet. So they're, expected to stay later at the office or take on extra hours or take on extra responsibilities. And so I think somehow recognizing that and maybe finding a better balance, or at least trying to figure out how we can collectively continue to find solutions to make it easier to have really good childcare that we can raise the next generation with a lot of, responsibility and care and love, but also allowing the people that are, childbearing to still have a life and try to pursue a path of their own.
Yeah, all super good points. And, that was the one thing when we started 100 Real Women, we did a ton of research. And what really came out was what you were talking about, leadership confidence, but it's for acknowledging each other and public acknowledgement and letting people know they're doing a good job. But I love that commiserating and gossip. That's a very interesting delineation there. So that's a really good thing. And I can't begin to thank you. I know you're super busy, so I'm so excited you were able to take time to connect today. And the last question I asked, and of course it has to be a two-parter because I can't help myself, but what advice would you give your younger self? And what advice would you give a young woman navigating today?
Yeah, when we had originally, I think we did an interview together, Teresa, like 5 years ago.
You
And so I
did.
went back and looked at that. And I feel like I need to take advice from my younger self in, trying to pursue a really fearless life. I think I have just entered a new career and I live in, a new place where I'm trying to figure out the community dynamics and trying to figure out kind of my new professional personality. And I am finding that I know like a dangerous amount where I feel like I'm more timid right now because I'm just trying to navigate who I am in this like new career in this new place. And so I went back to this interview and, it's like my younger self, I was saying that if I could give advice to my younger self, I would be more fearless and just like ready to take the leap and just be willing to go for things. And if you try to just approach things, I think with kindness and honesty, I think that you can't go wrong. And so I think I'm now going to take the advice from my younger self as my older self and try to find more confidence in building this new career again for myself, which I think is the same advice I would give to any young rural woman. And that's so much easier said than done, and thinking about, just be fearless and be confident. But I think finding your voice and something that you just are confident in what you know and standing your ground. And I think I would borrow even the Brene Brown phrase of what is it? A soft front, tall back, wild heart. And I just think that's like the perfect epitome of really capturing the strength of womanhood in really having so much empathy for people around us while remaining completely strong in where we stand and standing tall and allowing ourselves to still, have the wild heart and seeking adventure and fun and silliness. And I just don't think there's any better way to have a really incredibly fulfilling life and career than trying to merge those things and blend those things into like a really beautiful marriage for yourself.
Well, you are amazing, incredible. I went back too and looked at that interview, and it's just interesting to see how we all evolve. And that's just such an amazing place you're ending up in the law, which is just like it's such a good fit. It's one of those things where I would never think, oh, bankruptcy law, but yeah, bankruptcy law. That's just incredible to have you working in that. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we close today?
Well, no, I thank you so much for having me on, Teresa. And it's such a treat to talk to you again. And I really just, I want to say, I also listened to your interview and I'm so happy that you put yourself online for the first feature of the podcast. But I just am so amazed with everything that you've done with your life and your career. And I really only aspire to continue to like harness your energy, your channel your energy to kind of hopefully do at least a small percentage of everything you've been able to accomplish. And yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I think it's one of those things that I think, life is not linear, but it's so easy at some point in time when you keep doing things. I think it's so easy to look back and see how everything connects and relates. And so yeah, I just am really grateful for this life that I am living right now. And I really hope that this podcast continues to be a really beautiful light for other people and invite people to reach out, I guess, if they have any questions about bankruptcy law or law school or really anything else, I guess, that maybe would have been touched on in this interview. But yeah, thank you, Teresa. I really just admire you so greatly. And I'm so happy that we got to chat again.
I'm so happy too. And yeah, that first episode definitely was not my idea, but Alexa, who helped me build this, was like, "Oh no, we're going to interview you first." So I was like, "Oh no," but it was fun. It was good. It was a good thing to do.
Yeah,
So
and it was incredible. And I think that's so fun to know your interviewer too.
yeah, it was fun. It was fun. She was one of my first interns that we worked with. Well, cool. Well, so good to see you.